Mountain Man bought the obese girl for $2, was shocked when she took the sack off. The transaction seemed harmless at first, just a strange mountain dweller and his peculiar purchase that raised eyebrows throughout the small town. Nobody could have predicted what would happen when that mysterious sack was finally removed. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The midday sun beat down mercilessly on the crowded square of Ashwood, North Carolina, turning the summer air thick and oppressive. Townsfolk had gathered early, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and cruel anticipation for what had become known as the charity auction. Though there was nothing charitable about it. Children darted between adults' legs while merchants hawked refreshments, creating a carnival atmosphere that only heightened the cruelty of what was about to unfold. On the creaking wooden stage, Maria Johnson stood completely still, her entire head and body hidden beneath a rough burlap sack that reached her ankles. Only her bare feet were visible, shifting nervously against the splintered boards. Occasional trembles ran through the fabric, betraying the human being inside, yet this vulnerability only seemed to fuel the crowd's entertainment. "Look at that sack move. What do you reckon is in there?" a man called out, triggering a wave of laughter that rippled through the gathering. "Something the Johnson family couldn't wait to be rid of," a woman responded, her voice carrying enough to ensure Maria could hear every word. Whispers circulated about the girl beneath the covering, how she'd been nothing but a burden to her family, how no proper work could be found for her, how her presence had become an embarrassment to those who shared her name. Each cruel judgment landed like a physical blow, though no one could see Maria's face to witness the impact. In the midst of this carnival of cruelty, John Smith observed from the shadow of an oak tree at the square's edge. Known throughout the region simply as the Mountain Man, his weathered face remained impassive, though his eyes never left the shrouded figure on stage. Locals gave him a wide berth. The solitary survivalist rarely came to town, and when he did, he spoke little and departed quickly. Today was different. John had heard the stories whispered about the girl being auctioned, labeled useless by her own community, a shame to be hidden away. He'd listened to these tales in silence during his last supply run, something in the callousness of the gossip striking a chord deep within him. The auctioneer stepped forward, tapping his gavel for attention. "Ladies and gentlemen of Ashwood, today we have a special opportunity for someone with charitable intentions." His emphasis on the word drew knowing chuckles from the crowd. John straightened his tall frame and stepped from the shadows. Something in his gut refused to let Maria's story end here, a footnote of ridicule and neglect in Ashwood's history. His calloused hands tightened into fists as he moved deliberately toward the front of the gathering, his decision already made. $2. Do I hear 3? The auctioneer's voice cracked through the humid air of Ashwood Square, his weathered hand gripping the gavel with theatrical flair. The crowd's laughter rippled across the gathering as Maria Johnson stood motionless on the platform, the rough burlap concealing her entirely. $1.50. Anyone? The auctioneer continued, not even bothering to hide his smirk. Surely, this fine specimen is worth something to someone. His mockery drew more cruel chuckles from the onlookers. No one stepped forward. The villagers merely exchanged glances, some shaking their heads, others whispering behind cupped hands. They had all known Maria since childhood, the girl nobody wanted, the burden passed from one reluctant caretaker to another. From the edge of the crowd, John Smith observed the spectacle with narrowed eyes. The Mountain Man rarely ventured into town, preferring the solitude of his cabin to the pettiness of village life. Yet something about this display of cruelty had drawn him here today. He shifted his weight, the leather of his worn boots creaking as he stepped forward. $2, he said, his voice quiet but firm enough to cut through the jeers. The crowd fell silent, all eyes turning toward the tall figure. John's weathered face remained impassive as he reached into his pocket, producing 2 crumpled bills. The auctioneer blinked in surprise before a slow grin spread across his face. $2 from the mountain man, he announced, stretching out the moment for dramatic effect. Going once. A snicker started somewhere in the back of the crowd, quickly spreading until the entire square echoed with laughter. Some pointed openly at John, others at the motionless figure on the stage. Going twice? The auctioneer continued, milking the moment. Under the sack, Maria's hands trembled uncontrollably. She could hear everything, every laugh, every whisper, every cruel joke at her expense. Her fingers clutched at the rough fabric, knuckles white with tension. She had no idea what fate awaited her with this stranger they called the Mountain Man. But her heart clung to one desperate thought. Nothing could be worse than this moment, this humiliation, this public reminder of her worthlessness. Sold! The gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through Maria's very bones. For $2 to John Smith. As the crowd dispersed, still chuckling at what they considered the joke of the season, Maria stood frozen, awaiting whatever came next. For better or worse, her life in Ashwood was over. The auction crowd scattered like autumn leaves, their entertainment over for the day. John Smith guided Maria Johnson away from the square with a gentle touch, his calloused hand resting on her shoulder, firm enough to direct, yet careful not to frighten the girl beneath the burlap. The villagers of Ashwood parted reluctantly, their faces twisted with judgment and morbid curiosity. "What's the mountain man going to do with her?" someone whispered loudly enough to be heard. $2 for damaged goods, another replied with a cruel laugh. "He's wasting his money." John ignored them, his weathered face betraying no emotion as he led Maria past the last row of buildings that marked the edge of town. The girl stumbled occasionally, her vision limited by the rough sack, but she followed without resistance. What choice did she have? The transaction was complete. As they left Ashwood behind, the jeers and whispers faded, replaced by the natural symphony of the forest. Birds called from overhead, squirrels chattered warnings as they passed, and dry leaves crunched beneath their feet. The air grew cooler, cleaner, carrying the scent of pine and earth rather than the stale odors of the village. They walked for nearly an hour along winding paths that grew steeper with each turn. John occasionally steadied Maria when the terrain became difficult, but otherwise maintained his silence. The mountain man wasn't known for conversation. Most in Ashwood claimed he'd forgotten how to speak after years of solitude. Maria's breathing grew labored as they climbed, but she never complained. The sack absorbed her sweat, making the rough material cling uncomfortably to her face. Still, she persisted, one foot in front of the other, wondering what fate awaited her with this stranger. When they finally reached the foothills, where the dense forest began to give way to rockier terrain, John stopped. The sudden halt made Maria bump gently into his back. She froze, uncertain what was expected of her. The mountain man turned and studied the burlap-covered figure before him. This was the moment of truth, away from the prying eyes of Ashwood. He raised his hand slowly and pointed to the sack covering her head. "You can take it off now," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle for a man of his size. They were the first words he'd spoken since the auction. Maria hesitated, her hands trembling slightly at the edges of the burlap. What would this silent mountain dweller think when he truly saw what he had purchased for $2? Would his kindness vanish like morning mist? She stood at the threshold between her past and whatever uncertain future awaited, gathering courage for the revelation to come. Maria's fingers trembled as they gripped the edge of the burlap sack. For a moment, she hesitated, years of shame and ridicule making her reluctant to reveal herself. The forest around them was silent, as if holding its breath. With a deep inhale, she finally pulled the coarse fabric away. Her dark wavy hair tumbled down past her shoulders, catching the dappled sunlight filtering through the trees. John Smith stood motionless, taking in the face that had been hidden from the world. Maria Johnson's features held an unexpected duality, softness in the gentle curve of her cheeks, yet strength in the determined set of her jaw. But it was her eyes that truly captured his attention, sharp, intelligent, and burning with an intensity that took him by surprise. "I can stand on my own," she said quietly, her voice stronger than he'd expected after her silence during their journey from Ashwood. The mountain man nodded, stepping back to give her space. He'd heard the villagers' cruel whispers, seen their dismissive glances, but the person standing before him now defied every assumption those people had made. This was no broken spirit, no helpless outcast to be pitied. The fire in her gaze spoke of resilience, of depths untapped and potential unrealized. "The cabin's another hour up the trail," John said, gesturing toward the steeper path ahead. "Can you manage?" Maria straightened her shoulders, adjusting the worn dress that hung loosely on her frame. "I've managed worse than a mountain path," she replied, a hint of defiance coloring her words. As they began walking again, John noticed how she took in every detail of their surroundings, the specific patterns of moss on tree trunks, the subtle signs of animal tracks crossing their path. Her awareness was keen, her mind clearly working behind those observant eyes. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as they climbed higher into the mountains of North Carolina. Occasionally, Maria would pause to catch her breath, but she never complained or asked for help. Each time she stopped, she'd look back at the distance they'd covered, the village of Ashwood growing smaller below them. "They think you've made a mistake," she said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "And what do you think?" John asked, his weathered face unreadable. Maria considered his question, her gaze now fixed on the path ahead rather than the town behind. "I think mistakes are only clear in hindsight," she answered carefully, "and I'm not looking back anymore." John nodded, a hint of approval crossing his features. This was no fragile outcast. This was someone with untold depths waiting to be discovered. The steep mountain path stretched before them like a winding serpent, challenging Maria Johnson with every step. Her legs ached from the climb, but she refused to show weakness. The village of Ashwood had already seen enough of her vulnerability. Here, in this new world, she would be different. As they ascended through patches of pine and wild rhododendron, Maria kept her eyes fixed on John Smith's broad back. The mountain man moved with surprising grace for someone so large, navigating the uneven terrain as if it were a familiar dance. They had barely exchanged 10 words since leaving the auction square. The silence between them, filled only by bird song and the crunch of leaves beneath their feet. "I can read and write," Maria finally blurted out, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the mountain air, tinged with both defiance and fear. She watched John's reaction carefully, prepared for the dismissal she'd grown accustomed to in Ashwood. Back in the village, such skills were rare among women, viewed with suspicion rather than admiration. Her literacy had only added to her outsider status. John stopped abruptly, turning to face her. His weathered features softened with something Maria couldn't quite identify. Was it surprise? Respect? "That's valuable," he said simply, his voice deep and steady. "More valuable than most realize." Maria blinked, unprepared for this response. The mountain man gestured for her to continue walking, falling into step beside her now rather than leading ahead. "Books in my cabin," he continued, his words economical but kind. "Haven't had much use for them myself. They're yours if you want." As they climbed higher, John began pointing out landmarks, a cluster of medicinal herbs growing between rocks, animal tracks pressed into soft earth, the distant smoke from a neighboring cabin miles away. He explained how to read the direction of sunlight, how to identify which berries would nourish and which would poison. "I'll teach you to survive here," he promised, pausing at a ridge that revealed the vast wilderness stretching below them. "Tracking, hunting, building, things that keep you alive." He glanced at her, his eyes reflecting something that looked remarkably like hope. "And you can teach yourself with those books. Your mind's your own. No one can take that from you. Maria felt something unfamiliar bloom in her chest. Not quite trust, not yet, but perhaps its precursor. For the first time since being dragged to that auction block, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond shame and rejection. "We're almost there," John said, pointing toward a clearing ahead where the outline of a rustic cabin stood against the darkening sky. The cabin's wooden walls creaked against the mountain wind as Maria Johnson settled into her first night away from Ashwood. The single-room structure was sparse but sturdy, a far cry from the crowded corners she'd been forced to occupy in the village. A small fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the rough-hewn furniture. John had given her a small corner to call her own, with a straw mattress covered in surprisingly clean blankets. As she unpacked her meager possessions, a worn dress, a frayed hair ribbon, and little else, her fingers brushed against something cold and metallic deep in her pocket. Maria pulled out a small, tarnished medallion she'd almost forgotten she owned. "What's that you found?" John asked, looking up from where he was preparing a simple stew. "Something from before," she whispered, rubbing her thumb across the surface. The metal was worn smooth in places, but the crest remained visible, an intricate design of intertwined branches surrounding a small bird in flight. "It belonged to my grandmother. She told me it was our family's mark from generations back, when the Johnsons were respected craftspeople." The mountain man set down his wooden spoon and moved closer, careful not to invade her space. His weathered face softened in the firelight as he studied the emblem. "Your blood doesn't change because people treat you poorly," he said, his voice low and certain. "That medallion, it's proof you come from somewhere, that you belong to a lineage that survived long enough to create that symbol." Maria clutched the medallion tighter, feeling its edges press into her palm. "They made me forget this, made me believe I had nothing worth remembering." "That's how shame works," John replied, returning to the bubbling pot. "It makes you forget your own story. But objects like that, they hold memory when we can't." As they ate their simple meal, Maria kept the medallion beside her plate. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to remember her grandmother's stories. Tales of Johnson women who healed with herbs, of ancestors who carved their names into the history of these mountains long before Ashwood existed. That night, as wind whistled through the cabin's cracks, Maria hung the medallion on a small nail beside her bed. In the darkness, she traced its outline with her fingertips, feeling something shift inside her chest, a quiet awakening of dignity that had lain dormant for too long. The medallion wasn't just metal anymore. It was a promise to herself, a tether to a heritage that couldn't be auctioned away for any price, let alone $2. The morning air felt crisp against Maria Johnson's skin as she followed John into the dense woodland that surrounded his cabin. Dew still clung to the undergrowth, catching the early light in tiny prisms. The mountain man moved with practiced ease through the trees, his weathered hands occasionally pointing out details she would have missed. "These red berries will kill you," John explained, his voice low and steady. "But these darker ones, blackberries, they're safe. Good for eating, good for medicine too." He demonstrated how to check for ripeness, his calloused fingers delicate against the fruit. Maria watched intently, her eyes narrowing in concentration. When she tried to mimic his movements, her fingers fumbled, crushing several berries. Frustration burned in her chest, hot and uncomfortable. She had spent her whole life being told she was clumsy, worthless, and now, despite her determination, her hands seemed determined to prove Ashwood right. "I can't do this," she muttered, wiping purple juice from her palms onto her worn dress. John simply shook his head. "You can. You will. Try again." The survivalist then showed her how to identify deer tracks pressed into the soft earth, explaining how their direction and depth could tell stories about the animal's size and intentions. Maria knelt beside him, tracing the indentations with her fingertips, committing their shape to memory. They continued deeper into the forest, the canopy thickening overhead. Maria was so focused on spotting the signs John had taught her that she missed the warning: a slight disturbance in the fallen leaves, a too-perfect clearing. Her foot came down, and the world exploded into pain and fear. The trap snapped shut around her ankle, its rusted teeth digging through her boot. Maria cried out, more from shock than agony, as she toppled sideways onto the forest floor. John was beside her in an instant, his large hands already working to release the mechanism. "Don't move," he instructed, voice calm, despite the urgency in his eyes. Hunter's trap, careless work leaving it unmarked. He pried the metal jaws apart with surprising strength, freeing her leg. The trap had caught mostly boot leather, leaving only shallow scratches on her skin. "You're lucky," he said, examining her ankle. "Could have been much worse." Maria nodded, heart still pounding against her ribs. As John helped her stand, testing her weight on the injured foot, she gazed around at the beautiful, treacherous wilderness surrounding them. The mountains offered freedom she'd never known, but they demanded respect and constant vigilance. "The forest gives life," John said, reading her thoughts, "but it takes it just as easily if you're not careful." Maria straightened her shoulders. This was a lesson she wouldn't forget. As the mountain air grew crisper with each passing day, Maria Johnson's hands became tougher, her steps more confident. Weeks melted into one another as she absorbed everything John taught her. The girl who had once been auctioned off for $2 was transforming before his eyes. "Keep your hands steady," John instructed, as Maria struggled to maintain the delicate balance needed to ignite the kindling. After 3 failed attempts, a tiny flame flickered to life. Her eyes widened with triumph as she carefully fed it small twigs until it grew strong enough to warm them both. "I did it," she exclaimed, her face illuminated by the dancing light. The mountain man nodded, his weathered features softening. "You learn quickly." By the icy stream that cut through the forest, Maria developed a patience she never knew she possessed. The first time she tried fishing, she nearly tumbled into the frigid water. Now she could stand perfectly still for nearly an hour, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When she caught her first trout, the pride that swelled in her chest was unlike anything she'd experienced in Ashwood. "The village never saw what I could do," she told John one evening as they prepared the day's catch. "They only saw what they wanted to see," he finished for her, his voice gentle but firm. "People often miss what's right in front of them." The shelter building proved most challenging. Maria's fingers bled from gathering branches and weaving them together. After a particularly frustrating day when her carefully constructed lean-to collapsed, she sat on a fallen log, fighting back tears of frustration. John didn't offer empty comfort. Instead, he sat beside her in silence before saying, "Tomorrow, we'll try again. Different approach." That was his way. Never coddling, never pitying, but never cruel. When Maria successfully constructed her first waterproof shelter days later, the exhaustion in her muscles felt like a badge of honor. During these weeks, she noticed how John watched her work, not with the dismissive glances she'd grown accustomed to in the village, but with genuine interest in her progress. He saw her stumble, fall, and rise again without judgment. He noticed her clever adaptations to his techniques, sometimes nodding with approval when she found a more efficient method. For the first time, someone was seeing Maria for her mind, her determination, her potential, not for the size of her body or the whispered rumors that had followed her through Ashwood's streets. In the mountains, away from judgmental eyes, she was becoming the person she was always meant to be: resourceful, strong, and unafraid to face challenges head-on. Each night, exhausted but fulfilled, Maria would trace the outline of her family medallion before sleep, feeling less like someone who had been discarded and more like someone who was being forged anew. The autumn sun filtered through the canopy as Maria Johnson knelt beside a cluster of plants with distinctive purple flowers. Her fingers hovered over them, remembering fragments of knowledge from her childhood. These weren't ordinary wildflowers. They were golden seal, rare and potent. "John," she called, excitement rising in her voice. "I think I found something important." The mountain man approached, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile when he saw her discovery. "You've got a good eye," he said, crouching beside her. "These are powerful medicine. My grandmother used to say one plant like this could save a life if you know how to use it." Maria had always possessed a natural talent for identifying plants. Back in Ashwood, this skill had been dismissed as useless, just another oddity that set her apart. But here in the mountains, John treated her knowledge with reverence. Over the next few days, he taught her how to harvest the herbs properly, preserving their healing properties. In his cabin, Maria watched intently as he demonstrated how to dry some leaves while grinding others into paste. The concentrated scent filled the small space as they worked together, creating tinctures and salves. The village doctor would charge $20 for medicine, not half as effective, John explained, showing her how to seal the remedies in small clay pots. Most folks have forgotten these old ways. Maria absorbed every detail, her hands growing steadier with each attempt. This wasn't just survival. This was something she could master, something valuable that came naturally to her. Their newfound pharmacy was tested sooner than expected. 3 days later, a merchant traveling the mountain pass collapsed near their stream. Maria spotted him first, a middle-aged man shivering violently despite the mild weather, his skin burning with fever. Together they carried him to the cabin. While John built up the fire, Maria prepared a mixture of the golden seal with honey and pine bark. Her movements were confident now, no longer the hesitant gestures of someone expecting failure. Through the night, she tended to the stranger, applying cool compresses and administering her remedy every few hours. By morning, his fever had broken. When the merchant finally opened his eyes, he stared at Maria with undisguised wonder. "You saved my life," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I've been to doctors in 3 states who couldn't break this fever." The gratitude in his eyes kindled something new within her, a sense of purpose beyond mere survival. For the first time, Maria saw herself not as someone to be rescued, but as a healer, someone with gifts the world needed. As the merchant recovered enough to continue his journey, he pressed a silver coin into her palm. "Worth more than $2 now, aren't you?" he said with a knowing smile that told her he'd heard her story. Maria closed her fingers around the coin, but its value paled compared to what she'd discovered about herself. The merchant's cart rattled down the mountain path, his eyes widening when he spotted Maria Johnson through the trees. She was gathering herbs near John Smith's cabin, her movements confident and purposeful. Back in Ashwood, his tale spread like wildfire. "That outcast girl is living with the mountain man," he told anyone who would listen at the village square. "She's not the same person. Something strange is happening up there." The village elders gathered that evening, their faces grim in the lamplight of the meeting hall. "John has taken advantage of her," one insisted. "She was vulnerable, and he's manipulating her." Another nodded solemnly. "Perhaps he bewitched her. Why else would she stay with such a recluse?" By morning, the rumors had transformed into accusations of kidnapping and dark mountain magic. Some villagers even suggested forming a search party to rescue Maria, though none had shown concern for her welfare before the auction. John remained undisturbed when Maria told him about the whispers reaching them from below. "People fear what they don't understand," he explained, his weathered face calm in the cabin's dim light. "And they don't understand why anyone would choose this life over theirs." The following day, he led Maria deeper into the forest than they'd ever ventured before. "These are the paths only the wildlife and I know," he said, pointing to nearly invisible breaks in the underbrush. "When you need to move unseen, follow the deer trails." Maria studied the subtle signs, bent twigs, displaced leaves, the particular way moss grew on one side of a tree. She committed each detail to memory, understanding that knowledge was her greatest protection. "The village may send someone up here," John warned as they crouched beside a hidden spring. "Not out of concern for you, but fear of me, of us." Maria nodded, remembering the cruel laughter at the auction. "They never cared before," she said softly. "People only notice what they've lost, not what they've thrown away," he replied. For hours, they practiced moving silently through the forest, using natural features for concealment. John showed her how to walk without leaving tracks, how to listen for approaching strangers, and how to disappear into the landscape when necessary. "In these mountains," he told her as the sun began to set, "danger comes in many forms. Weather, wildlife, and sometimes people, but so does opportunity." Maria understood. The same skills that kept her safe could help her thrive. The same independence that made villagers suspicious gave her freedom they couldn't imagine. That night, as they returned to the cabin under a blanket of stars, Maria realized she was no longer afraid of the village's judgment. She had found something more valuable than their approval, the ability to chart her own course, whether through hidden mountain paths or life itself. Maria Johnson sat cross-legged by the fireplace, her fingers tracing the outline of a snare she had crafted entirely on her own. 4 months ago, she couldn't have imagined surviving a single night in these mountains. Now, she could identify edible plants, build shelters, and even track small game. Each skill was a victory against the voices that had haunted her for years. "You've got a natural talent for this," John remarked, watching her work with quiet admiration. She smiled, but the compliment stirred something painful within her. For every moment of pride, memories from Ashwood would intrude. The auction block, the laughter, the sack that had hidden her from view, but not from shame. At night, these thoughts would creep in like the mountain chill, making her question if she truly deserved this new life. "The trap looks good," she replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil beneath. "I'll set it at dawn." Later that evening, while John was out checking their perimeter, Maria noticed a loose floorboard near her sleeping area. Curiosity piqued, she pried it open, revealing a small cavity beneath. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. By candlelight, she began to read. The journal belonged to Rebecca, a young woman who had sought refuge in the cabin decades earlier. Like Maria, she had fled ridicule and judgment, finding solace in the mountain's embrace. "They called me worthless," one entry read, "but here I've learned that worth isn't measured by others' scales. The mountains don't care about your past, only your will to survive them." Maria's hands trembled as she turned each page. Rebecca's journey mirrored her own, the initial fear, the small triumphs, the gradual awakening to her own strength. The woman had eventually returned to society, not as a victim, but as someone transformed by her time in the wilderness. When John returned, he found Maria clutching the journal to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "She was like thee," Maria whispered. "And she made it." The mountain man nodded, understanding immediately. "I wondered when you'd find that." Rebecca left it here intentionally, hoping it might help someone else someday. That night, Maria slept with the journal beside her pillow. The shame that had followed her like a shadow began to recede, replaced by something stronger. If Rebecca could forge her own path, so could she. In the morning, Maria rose before dawn, the journal's words echoing in her mind. "Your scars are proof you survived. Wear them proudly." She stepped outside, breathing in the crisp mountain air, ready to set her traps and face whatever challenges the day might bring. Winter arrived with sudden, brutal force. One morning, Maria Johnson woke to find the world outside transformed into a white fortress. Snow piled against the cabin walls, and the wind howled with such ferocity it seemed determined to tear their shelter apart. By nightfall, they realized this was no ordinary mountain storm. "I've never seen one hit this hard, this early," John muttered. eyeing the ceiling where melted snow dripped through previously unnoticed cracks. His weathered face showed concern as he assessed their dwindling supplies. For 3 relentless days, the blizzard raged. The temperature plummeted, turning their breath to fog inside the cabin. Maria wrapped herself in every available layer, but the cold still found ways to seep into her bones. Their food stores, meant to last weeks longer, began to dwindle alarmingly fast as they burned extra energy just trying to stay warm. "We need to fix these leaks," she said on the second day, watching another puddle form on the wooden floor. Without waiting for approval, Maria gathered the knowledge she'd accumulated over the months. She collected moss from the cabin's north-facing exterior wall, where it grew thick despite the snow, and used it to pack the worst of the ceiling cracks. John watched in silence as she worked methodically, her fingers nimble despite the cold. When he offered help, she directed him with newfound authority, pointing out spots he'd missed and suggesting better ways to distribute their limited firewood. "Save the larger logs," Maria instructed. "We'll need them for the night when the temperature drops even further." By the 3rd day, their drinking water had frozen solid. Maria devised a system of collecting snow in containers placed strategically near their small fire, creating a constant supply of drinking water. She carefully rationed their remaining food, calculating exactly how long they could survive if the storm continued. "3 more days," she whispered to John as they huddled near the fire. "We can make it 3 more days before we need to try hunting, storm or not." When dawn broke on the 4th day, an eerie silence replaced the howling wind. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white drifts taller than Maria herself. John stood in the doorway, surveying the damage and the beauty with equal measure. He turned to look at his companion, seeing not the girl he'd purchased for $2, but a woman who had just helped them survive what could have been a deadly situation. "You know," he said quietly, "I brought you here thinking I would teach you to survive. But what happened these past few days?" He paused, a rare smile crossing his face. "That wasn't just survival. You're a true partner now." Maria nodded, understanding the significance of his words. In the harshest test nature could provide, she had proven herself not just capable, but essential. As the last catches of snow melted from the mountain slopes, Ashwood began to buzz with stories of Maria Johnson. The bitter winter that had tested her resolve had given way to spring, and with it came whispers carried down from the heights by travelers and merchants who had glimpsed the once ridiculed girl. "She survived the worst blizzard in 20 years, one trader told the gathered crowd at the village square. "Built shelters better than men twice her age. The mountain man doesn't even call her girl anymore. They're partners up there." These tales travel through Ashwood like wildfire, from the general store to the schoolhouse, where young girls listened with widening eyes. Children who had once joined in the mockery now collected Maria's stories like precious gems, retelling them during recess with admiration in their voices. Emma Taylor, a shy 12-year-old who had always been teased for her bookishness, began standing straighter after hearing how Maria used her knowledge of plants to heal a feverish traveler. "If Maria can be brave on the mountain, I can be brave here," she told her mother one evening. The transformation extended beyond children. Young women who had been told their dreams were too ambitious suddenly found courage in Maria's example. Sarah Collins, who had wanted to learn carpentry despite her father's objections, finally approached the town's woodworker for apprenticeship. "The girl they sold for $2 is worth more than this entire village now," an elderly woman remarked, her weathered hands pausing over her knitting. "Shows what fools we all were." One crisp morning, Maria ventured down to gather supplies, unaware of her growing legend. She noticed the changed glances, not the cruel stares of before, but looks of curiosity and something that resembled respect. A group of children followed her at a distance, whispering excitedly. That evening, as she climbed back toward the cabin she shared with John, Maria paused on a ridge overlooking Ashwood. The setting sun painted the village in golden light, making it look almost welcoming. For the first time, she saw her journey clearly, not just as personal survival, but as a beacon for others. "They're talking about you down there," John said, appearing beside her on the trail. "You've given them something to think about." Maria nodded, feeling the weight of this unexpected responsibility. Her fingers found the medallion in her pocket, tracing its familiar contours. "I never wanted to be important," she said softly. "I just wanted to live." "Sometimes," John replied, his voice gentle, "that's the most revolutionary act of all." The village elders of Ashwood arrived at John Smith's cabin on a crisp spring morning, their faces a mixture of discomfort and determination. 3 men and 2 women, all dressed in their Sunday best, stood awkwardly on the porch, while Maria Johnson greeted them with quiet dignity. The mountain man watched from the doorway, his weathered face revealing nothing. "We've come to speak with you, Maria," said Harold Finch, the head elder, removing his hat. "The village council has been reconsidering matters." Maria invited them inside, where they perched uncomfortably on rough-hewn furniture. The cabin, once strange to her, now felt like a fortress of safety compared to the judgment she'd faced in Ashwood. "People are talking," explained Eleanor Wade, the only female elder who had shown Maria any kindness in the past. "The travelers who've met you speak of your knowledge of healing. The Michaels family hasn't stopped telling everyone how you saved their son with that fever remedy." Harold cleared his throat. "What we mean to say is, Ashwood could use someone with your talents. We're prepared to offer you a position teaching reading at the schoolhouse, and perhaps you could share your knowledge of medicinal plants." Maria's eyes widened. The same community that had hidden her under a sack and auctioned her off for $2 now wanted her expertise. She felt John shift behind her, a silent reminder of her worth beyond what Ashwood had ever recognized. "We understand if you harbor ill feelings," another elder added hastily, "but the younger folks especially, they're inspired by your story, the girls in particular." Maria walked to the window, gazing down at the valley where Ashwood lay nestled among green hills. She thought of the children there who, like her, might feel different or unwanted. She thought of the journal she'd found beneath the floorboards, its message of hope now echoing in her own life. "I won't leave the mountains," she said finally, turning to face them. "This is my home now, but I could come to the village twice a week, on my terms." The elders exchanged glances, clearly having expected either outright rejection or grateful acceptance, not negotiation. "Your terms?" Harold asked. "I teach reading to anyone who wishes to learn, not just those who can pay. And I'll share my knowledge of plants and survival, but I won't be paraded as your success story." John's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, the closest he came to smiling in company. "We can arrange that," Eleanor said quickly, before the men could object. As the elders departed, Maria stood beside John on the porch, watching them descend the mountain path. "You could have refused them," he said quietly. Maria nodded. "I could have, but then nothing would change." Despite the delegation's offer, Maria Johnson's potential return to Ashwood sparked divided reactions throughout the small North Carolina community. Outside the general store, older women huddled in tight circles, their whispers sharp enough to cut. "That girl's been bewitched by the mountain man," Martha Wilson declared, her voice carrying across the dusty street. "No one lives with a stranger in the wilderness and comes back normal." Others nodded in solemn agreement. The blacksmith's wife claimed Maria had been seen gathering strange herbs at midnight, while the butcher swore she'd grown wild eyes that could hypnotize children. These fabrications spread like wildfire through Ashwood, feeding the fear that had always surrounded anything different or unexpected. The village council, though officially extending their invitation, remained privately skeptical. She'll bring nothing but shame if she returns, Councilman Peters muttered after their meeting. The Johnson girl was trouble before she left. Imagine what she's become now. When these rumors reached Maria, she stood at the edge of the forest, her medallion clutched tightly in her palm. The weight of their judgment felt familiar, yet somehow lighter than before. She traced the family insignia with her thumb, drawing strength from the connection to her heritage. "They still see me as the girl in the sack," she told John as they walked the hidden mountain trails together. Her voice was steady, her steps sure on the uneven ground. The mountain man nodded, his weathered face thoughtful. "People fear what changes without their permission," he replied. "Your transformation wasn't for their comfort." Maria paused by the icy stream where she'd learned to fish months before. The water reflected her face, no longer timid, no longer ashamed. "I won't let them decide who I am," she said. Not again. In the days that followed, she continued her journey between two worlds. When villagers turned away or whispered behind raised hands, she met their gaze directly. When children were pulled from her path, she offered a gentle smile instead of shrinking back. "I honor where I came from," she told a group of curious young girls who dared approach her at the market. "And I honor what the mountains taught me. Both are part of who I am now." Her unwavering resolve gradually silenced some of the harshest critics. She wasn't fighting for their approval anymore. She was simply claiming her right to exist on her own terms, to bridge the gap between the village of her birth and the wilderness that had given her strength. Maria Johnson began dividing her time between the mountain cabin and Ashwood Village, creating a bridge between the two worlds that had shaped her journey. 3 times a week, she would walk down the winding forest path, a satchel of herbs slung over her shoulder, determination in each step. In a small corner of the village square, the very place where she had once stood on auction, Maria now gathered young girls whose potential had been overlooked. Under the shade of an old oak tree, she taught them to form letters and string together words, watching their eyes light up with the same fire that had sustained her through the darkest times. "Reading gave me a voice when no one would listen," she told them, her fingers guiding a small hand across a page. "It's a freedom no one can take from you." The girls hung on her every word, not just because of her knowledge, but because Maria understood what it meant to be dismissed. She recognized the hunger in their expressions, the same desire to prove their worth that had driven her up the mountain months before. Her lessons extended beyond letters and numbers. Maria shared her knowledge of medicinal plants, teaching the children which leaves could soothe a fever and which roots could heal a wound. She showed them how to build simple shelters and find north without a compass, skills that had once seemed beyond her reach. "The mountains taught me that strength isn't always visible," she explained, helping a shy girl identify a healing herb. "Sometimes it grows quietly, like these plants, waiting for the right moment." Parents who had once whispered cruel judgments now watched with reluctant admiration as their daughters blossomed under Maria's guidance. Some even approached her for remedies when traditional medicines failed, their prejudices slowly dissolving in the face of her undeniable wisdom. From his position on the edge of the village, John Smith observed these transformations with quiet pride. He rarely ventured into town, preferring the solitude of the mountains, but he made exceptions to watch Maria teach. The mountain man noticed how she stood taller now, how confidence shaped her words and guided her movements. When their eyes met across the square, a silent understanding passed between them. Their bond, forged through harsh winters and shared struggles, had evolved into something neither could have predicted. They were partners now, equals united by mutual respect and the knowledge that true worth had nothing to do with the price once placed on her head. As dusk fell, Maria would gather her materials and walk back up the mountain path, returning to the cabin that had become her sanctuary. There, she and John would sit by the fire, planning tomorrow's lessons and sharing stories of the day. Their laughter echoed through the trees, a testament to the unbreakable connection between two souls who had found family in the most unexpected circumstances. Word of Maria Johnson's remarkable transformation spread like wildfire across the region. By early summer, merchants traveling through Ashwood began making deliberate detours to the mountain paths leading to her cabin. They came with curiosity, but left with something far more valuable: jars of her healing salves, carefully wrapped bundles of rare herbs, and stories of the girl who had risen from humiliation to become a beacon of knowledge. "Your willowbark tincture saved my wife from 3 days of unbearable pain," a leather-faced trader from Charlotte told her, pressing extra coins into her palm despite her protests. "Worth twice what I'm giving you." Maria smiled, still uncomfortable with praise but learning to accept it. The small wooden table outside John's cabin, now equally hers, often hosted visitors from as far as Tennessee and Virginia. Healers with formal training would sit for hours, exchanging knowledge with the young woman once hidden beneath a sack. "You've created quite the reputation," John remarked one evening as they watched the sun sink behind the ridgeline. "Not bad for someone bought for $2. His eyes crinkled with quiet pride. She laughed, no longer wounded by references to that day. "Those $2 were the best investment you ever made." A traveling midwife from a neighboring county spent 3 days learning Maria's methods for easing difficult births. In exchange, she shared her own knowledge of childbirth complications, information Maria carefully recorded in a leather-bound journal, her neat handwriting filling page after page. "You could study medicine formally," the midwife suggested before departing. "There are programs that would welcome someone with your natural abilities." The idea planted itself firmly in Maria's mind. Each visitor brought not just trade goods or knowledge, but glimpses of possibilities she'd never imagined for herself. The girl who once believed her only value was in what others saw in her physical appearance now recognized the power of her mind, her hands, and her spirit. One rainy afternoon, as Maria organized her growing collection of dried herbs, John watched her methodical movements. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "this cabin's getting too small for your ambitions." Maria paused, hands hovering over bundles of yarrow and echinacea. "What do you mean?" "I mean you're building something bigger than these mountains, Maria. Your story travels with every merchant who leaves here. You're becoming more than just a healer. You're becoming hope." She considered his words carefully, running her fingers along the edge of her medallion, the family crest that had become her talisman. For the first time, Maria truly understood that her journey had just begun. The path ahead was hers to create, unbound by the limitations others had once placed upon her. The mountains had taught Maria Johnson many lessons, but they weren't finished with her education yet. One crisp autumn morning, she ventured deep into the forest's heart, her woven basket already half filled with yarrow and elderberry. The medicinal plants had become her specialty, and locals from Ashwood now sought her remedies rather than dismissing her knowledge. As she knelt to examine a patch of wild ginger, unfamiliar voices carried on the wind, high-pitched and panicked. Following the sounds, Maria discovered 3 children huddled beneath a rocky overhang. The Pearson twins, barely 7 years old, and young Timothy Baker from the general store. Their faces were streaked with tears, their clothes torn from brambles. "We were just exploring," sobbed Emma Pearson, "but nothing looks the same anymore." Maria recognized the fear in their eyes. She had felt that same helplessness once. Without hesitation, she set down her basket and assessed the situation. The children had wandered nearly 5 miles from town, and dark clouds threatened rain. "First, we need to get warm," she explained calmly, gathering kindling. The children watched in awe as she built a small fire using techniques John had taught her. She shared the bread and dried berries from her pack, establishing trust with each reassuring word. "My father says you're different," Timothy whispered as Maria wrapped her shawl around his shivering shoulders. "He says the mountain man changed you." She smiled. "We change ourselves, Timothy. Others just help us see what's possible." As the rain began, Maria fashioned a simple shelter using branches and her knowledge of the forest. She told stories of survival and courage, keeping their spirits high while waiting for the downpour to pass. When the skies cleared, she led them through hidden trails and across shallow streams, teaching them natural markers to remember their way. The village came into view just as dusk settled. Parents who had formed search parties rushed forward, their relief palpable. These were the same people who had once laughed at her auction, who had deemed her worthless. Now they embraced her with tearful gratitude. "You saved our children," Mrs. Pearson said, clutching Maria's hands. "How can we ever repay you?" The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of past cruelties. Maria thought of John, waiting in their cabin, and the journey they had traveled together. "Just remember that worth isn't something you can see at first glance," she answered quietly. In the days that followed, invitations arrived at the cabin. Doors that had once been closed now opened wide. Maria had become more than accepted. She was valued, a living bridge between the wilderness and the village, between judgment and understanding. The mountains had tested her once more, and in saving those children, she had finally found her freedom. The seasons cycled through Ashwood like pages turning in a well-worn book. Maria Johnson watched as summer faded to autumn, then winter, and back to spring again, each passing month, cementing her place in the community that had once cast her aside. In the small schoolhouse at the edge of town, Maria guided young hands through the careful process of identifying medicinal plants. "Gentleness," she reminded them, her dark hair catching the afternoon light as she moved between the wooden desks. "The most powerful remedies often come from the most delicate sources." The children hung on her every word. To them, Maria wasn't just a teacher. She was living proof that circumstances couldn't determine destiny. Many of these children had grown up hearing the tale of the girl sold for $2, a story that had transformed from one of shame to one of triumph. Miss Johnson, a small girl with braided hair, asked, "Is it true you saved Mr. Peterson when nobody else could help him?" Maria smiled, remembering the traveler whose life she'd saved with her herbal knowledge. "Sometimes healing comes from unexpected places," she answered, "just like strength." Beyond the classroom, her influence spread like ripples in still water. Young women who had once been told to silence their voices now spoke with confidence. Children who had been overlooked for their differences found purpose in their uniqueness. John Smith watched this transformation from a respectful distance. The mountain man had never sought recognition for his role in Maria's journey, but the bond between them had only deepened with time. They moved through the world as equals now, partners in the truest sense. "You've changed this place," John told her one evening, as they walked the ridge overlooking Ashwood. "Not just the people, but the heart of it." Maria gazed at the village below, lights twinkling in windows that once represented rejection. "We changed it," she corrected him. "Some journeys can't be walked alone." Their partnership had become legendary in its own right. The reclusive mountain dweller and the once scorned young woman, together rewriting what community could mean. They had created a bridge between isolation and belonging, between judgment and acceptance. As twilight settled over the valley, Maria reflected on how far she had come from that auction block. The medallion that had once been her only connection to her heritage now rested alongside dozens of other treasures: letters from grateful patients, drawings from her students, tokens of a life rich with purpose. The story of the girl worth only $2 had become a legend of hope throughout the region, a reminder that value isn't assigned by others, but discovered within oneself and nurtured by those who truly see us. Standing on the ridge above Ashwood, Maria Johnson gazed at the valley below. The morning mist clung to the rooftops of the town that had once tried to break her spirit. She wrapped her arms around herself, not from cold, but from a sense of completion that warmed her from within. The same mountains that had sheltered her now framed her view of a past transformed. "It's changed," John remarked, his weathered face softening as he joined her on the overlook. "But not as much as you have." Maria smiled, watching the smoke rise from chimneys in the distance. 5 years had passed since that fateful day in the square when the mountain man had paid $2 for a girl hidden beneath a sack. 5 years of learning, growing, and reclaiming her worth. "I never thought I'd look down at Ashwood and feel anything but shame," she admitted, her fingers instinctively finding the old medallion she still wore around her neck. The family insignia caught the morning light, a reminder of the heritage she'd reclaimed. Below them, the village was stirring to life. Children gathered at the small schoolhouse where Maria taught 3 days each week. Women collected herbs from gardens planted under her guidance. Even the elders, once her harshest critics, now sought her counsel on matters of community and healing. "Remember when we couldn't walk through town without whispers following us?" she asked, her dark hair dancing in the breeze. John nodded, his eyes reflecting memories of their journey. "Now they whisper your name with respect." Maria had turned pain into purpose, transforming her story into a beacon for others. The girl once deemed worthless had established a small healing center where she trained young women in herbal medicine. Children who felt different or unwanted found refuge in her lessons about the forest and its secrets. "We should head down," she said. "The new apprentices are coming today." As they descended the familiar trail, Maria reflected on how she had bridged 2 worlds. She belonged neither exclusively to the mountain nor to the village, but had created something new between them. Her cabin, once John's alone, now served as both home and haven for those seeking to learn resilience. The journey that began with humiliation had blossomed into respect. The price tag of $2, once a mark of shame, had become a powerful part of her story, a reminder that true value could never be determined by others. The mountains that had witnessed her transformation now echoed with a new narrative, one of redemption, resilience, and the unbreakable strength of the human spirit. As Maria and John walked side by side toward Ashwood, their partnership a testament to compassion's power, she knew her story would continue to unfold in ways she'd never imagined possible. Her life had become proof that even from the darkest beginnings, one could claim a future filled with purpose, dignity, and love.